All right, very good. So this is a talk. It's sort of hard to compete with a 3D visualization. So this is back to some more basics. This is presenting you what I call best practices for research software engineers. I hope that's pretty well related to some of the ECSS topics. I gave it a subtitle, the Xpert Network, which is the project within which we're developing these best practices. I'm Rudi Eigenmann. I'm Department of Electrical Computer Engineering at the University of Delaware. And I have essentially put together 4 main points. I kept this a little short, knowing that I'm the second to talk in an hour. So let's see if I manage to get through it within 15, 20 minutes. I'll tell you in one slide what's the Xpert Network, then some of the driving motivations. Why are we actually doing that? And what's the relevance for ECSS? I think it is quite related. And then some initial results. These are actually the best practices we have developed in this project so far. And then what's next? And hopefully you will find something, or at least some of you will find something that you can hopefully participate in. So let's have a one-slide introduction of the Xpert Network. Sort of on the outside, what you see mostly in the Xpert Network is really a series of webinars that we hold monthly. And sometimes these are panels, sometimes these are individual talks, where we focus on best practices for computational experts. What do I mean by computational experts? I mean, there are really many terms for the same thing. To me, an expert is a person that supports computational data-intensive research, so assists typically domain researchers, biologists, physics, chemists in developing, running, optimizing their computational applications. You've seen other terms, research software engineer, so that's what I've used in the title. Sometimes we hear research facilitators, computational experts, research programmers. You could argue about differences in these terms, but essentially that's what I mean by the term expert. So we want to, for these folks, we want to develop best practices. One vision of this best practices is sort of if you have, let's say you are a leader of such a group that has computational experts helping domain scientists, you hire a new person, wouldn't you like to have some kind of a manual that you could put in that person's hands and say, these are some of the things you need to learn in your job. Part of the motivation for the Xpert Network was that I did not find such a manual. So we said, well, let's see if we can develop one. Now, some of these best practices are just behaviors or maybe knowledge that you need to acquire, but they're also tools that really enhance the expert productivity. That's what we're going to talk in this in these monthly webinars as well. There's a website if you want to hear or read more. Who do we invite to these webinars? Well, experts from large sponsored projects. Typically, we started out with many NSF projects. The biggest one really is ECSS. But there's also another NSF project that you may be aware of, Cybers. There are the NSF Software Institutes. There's the Open Science Grid, many large projects that have several experts, research software engineers that help the user community. We want to bring those together and essentially synergize. I'll get to that in just a second. There are also national organizations. You may be aware of the US RSC network. You may be aware of CARC, the Campus Research Computing Consortium. There are an increasing number of campus research software engineering teams that assist the users, the domain scientists on their campuses in developing computational applications. Very important also, there are individual experts, sometimes large or mid-size to large-size chemistry, physics projects. They can budget a single research software engineer, but that person is fairly alone under a number of chemists, biologists, physicists. Wouldn't it be nice if they had a place where they can plug in and discuss issues that they have with the community? And last but not least, the computational researchers themselves, so the actual computational physicists, computational biologists, we invite those to participate as well. What do we want to do with all those? Well, we want to bring them together. We want to create synergy. I'm a big believer in bringing people together. Good things will happen. And that's essentially at the high level what the Xpert Network aims to do. So let's go to my point number 2, which was, what is really the driving motivation? I already mentioned to you, we want to bring people together to see if we can synergize and make the sum greater than the parts. At the beginning was also sort of the observation that what we're all doing is incredibly important. I assume that I don't need to convince any one of you. We're really the choir here that I'm preaching to, right? You all are hopefully totally convinced high performance computing, computational science, data science is pushing the forefront of science. But have you ever asked yourself that if you go outside our community, how would you convince somebody that this is actually the case? That was part of what motivated us to create the Xpert Network. I'm almost a little bit embarrassed to say that I'm citing old publications, and I would really love to see newer versions of these 2 publications that I often refer to. One of them is actually a study that came out of Exceed-related work, where here on the left, if you look at the sort of the vertical lists, essentially all journals that are out there that have some notion of computational papers, and then horizontally, if the blue bar is to the left, that means the computational papers have less citation count, using citation count as sort of a metric for importance, than the average paper. And if the bar is to the right, then the computational paper has more citation counts than the average paper. So you see, on average, the citation count of computational papers is way higher than the average paper in these journals. So that's when I saw that paper for the first time, that study for the first time, I thought, wow, this is really the first time that I see true evidence that what we do, our computational work, is actually very, very important. Another paper, also embarrassingly 10 years old, and I hope somebody will soon create a new version of that, is a paper by Stan Ahold and Amy Apon. Some of you may remember this paper. They analyzed the top 500 and essentially found universities that put a machine onto the top 500. So they invest in the cyber infrastructure. They really go up in NSF funding and in the number of publications. So essentially what translates to they go up in ranking. So these are 2, in my opinion, extremely important motivations of the entire work that ECSS is doing, and also the work of the Xpert Network. So where's the ECSS role in all this? We just said computational data science is incredibly important. We all know that the physicists, we've heard that many times, physicists, biologists, chemists, they want to focus on their work. We need to support them in developing their computational applications. The return on the investment is extremely high. Some of you may remember that ECSS at one time did a study and asked the application folks that, what if you had to do the work that ECSS does for you yourself? How much time would you need to spend on this? And the result was that the number of hours or number of months the domain scientists would need to spend doing the same work was almost a factor of 4 longer than what ECSS does for them. To me, that means it's just a tremendous return on investment. Some of you may know that I had the pleasure of being Exceed's program manager a while back, and it was a pleasure to see that in every evaluation of Exceed, ECSS always turned out to be one of the most valuable player. So the return on investment was just really, really high of Exceed, and that again motivated the entire Xpert Network and what we're doing here. Now, how can we do even better than what I just said? How can we do even better than ECSS? Well, I also asked the question, well, ECSSers or cybers or Software Institute staff, how do you exchange ideas with the other projects? And the answer was, well, there wasn't yet a mechanism to really do that. That then was the final trigger for me to create something like the Xpert Network and say, hey guys, let's get together and see if we can synergize, if we can, by exchanging our ideas, create something that's bigger. What we then focused on is the following. You know, you can synergize in many ways. One big open problem was exactly this question of best practices. So how do we develop the skills that we need to acquire if we are in the job of supporting domain scientists? And related to that, as I mentioned already, also the question of what are the best tools that enhance the productivity of the experts, of the research software engineers. It was also mentioned it would be nice if this Xpert network could do some project coordination across, you know, Exceed, ECSS, Cyber, the Software Institutes, and the other projects that I mentioned. We're still struggling with this a little bit. You know, what does it mean? How can we best coordinate across the projects? We believe good things will happen if we do that, but we don't quite know yet in what best way we could do that. The Xpert Network does only a simple thing right now. At the beginning of every event, we ask for the participants to share community announcements. So if you're participating in one of our events at the beginning, you have a chance to say, hey, there's a workshop, there's a hackathon, there's some other event in our community that's coming up, and please participate in that in some form. A topic we do not focus on, it's also extremely important topic, is the professionalization of RSEs. Why do we not focus on that? Well, at the beginning, when we started the Xpert Network, we sort of, I asked around, what are the other projects that pursue similar things, such as CARC? What are you focusing on? And the answer I got is, we are focusing on this very aspect of professionalization. So how can we make out of our community something that's professionally accepted, understood in a university curricula, and so on. So then we decided that this is not a topic for the Xpert Network. We're focusing on the best practices. So let's talk about best practices. So finally, back to the title of this project. I'm not going to go through this entire list, just telling you that out of the activities that we've had so far, you know, in-person meetings, the webinars, we have put together a paper that summarizes what has been mentioned as the best practices and also the tools that support these best practices. Perinas Barakcan, who is also listening in to this presentation, is the lead author. She has put a lot of effort into, you know, viewing and reviewing all the videos, all the material that we have collected so far in the Xpert Network activities, and puts together a paper that talks about these best practices and also the associated tools. Maybe just one or two that I pick out of this summary list of best practices. There are two categories. One is more best practices for collaboration. Let's pick number two. That's actually an interesting one. I think that was first mentioned by Henry Niemann, who many of you know. He's doing this virtual residency program. Henry once emphatically said, well, then the first and most important thing I need to teach my participants, which he called research facilitators, is to understand the academic environment. This is very different from if you do software development in industry. You really need to understand the incentive structure that exists in a university environment. Once you do that, especially if you come from industry originally, you have a much better understanding of your job. Maybe a topic I want to pick in the next category, best practices on software development, is many really of the participants, they have pointed out how important it is at the beginning that the experts, the research software engineers spend sufficient time with the domain scientists, really understanding what is the application problem and making plans, talking about possibilities, and not jumping into sort of a quick start, too quick a start of the software development. They mentioned that this is even more important than in a general software engineering context. I don't want to talk too much about tools. Many of the tools are probably tools that you know very well, but we put this in the paper as well, because I think it's actually a very nice list of all the tools that have been mentioned by participants in the Xpert Network, and gives you sort of a summary. You may glance through it and see if you find a tool that was mentioned that you perhaps haven't heard of. So here's the reference of this paper. I invite you to take a look and maybe tell us your reaction. Let's go to my fourth topic. What's next? And is there something in it for you? We certainly will continue the webinar series where you can share your experiences. If you are an experienced research software engineer or expert, we want to learn from you. If you have topics, if you have issues that you want to bring up, maybe you are a single research programmer of part of a physics group and you have questions, you can participate and ask these questions. We have in-person events. I hope we can resume them soon. Of course, they are right now, they are suspended until we can meet in person again. They would allow us to have more in-depth discussion as such half-day or even full-day workshops would allow. We're looking now also for an extended best practices report. We felt that this initial paper is just a starting point. It's always better to react to something than to create this best practices manual from start. I'm now looking for co-authors. Some of you have already mentioned you're interested. If more of you are interested, let's get together and see how we can really create a useful manual for the entire community of research software engineers. And last but not least, I'm thinking of how could we extend this project into something that you might even propose as possible NSF Cyber Infrastructure Center of Excellence, something that is a true collaboratorium for experts, research software engineers, that includes projects like ECSS and the other projects I have mentioned. If you are interested in maybe pursuing that, contact me and we'll see if we can actually work on such a proposal. So these were my 4 points. What's the Xpert Network? You know, what's the role of ECSS? Something about the actual best practices, and I gave you the paper where hopefully is a useful resource for you. And then also what's next in this project. And with this, it's discussion time. Thanks so much for listening.
Great, thank you, Rudi. That was fantastic. Do we have any questions for Rudi? Well, while you're all thinking, I will go ahead and ask one of my questions. So Rudi, you referred to that paper showing the impact of having a top 500 system at a university. Did they do any breakdown between, how would I put it, systems that actually belong to the university and systems that are national resources? So for example, as you know, at TAC, PSC, SCSC, our big top 500 systems are, in a sense, they're not ours, they're community resources. Was there a distinction? Or did they find that even if you were deploying a system that was for national use, that it still had an impact?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the systems that show up higher are the big ones, right? But it is my understanding, and I'd have to go back in it. I mentioned it's a 10-year-old paper, so I have to go back and really double check that I remember that right. Even universities that had smaller investments in campus-oriented resources, they had a significant benefit from that.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for our speaker? Well, if not, Rudi, can you go back a few slides where you were showing, you had that figure that showed with the blue bars and red bars that showed the impact of having a compute. Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So obviously that's a little hard to read. So what are some of the, okay, can you tell me what are some of the fields up at the top or journals at the top, and what are some ones at the bottom?
They're literally all journals that at that time had at least one computational paper.
Okay.
So, I mean, it goes across the fields.
All right. And I'm curious, there are a handful at the bottom, though, where we're having a computational component actually resulted in fewer citations. Was there any trend there? Were there any particular fields where that was true?
That would be an interesting analysis. I don't quite remember what were the reasons for sort of in some journals that the negative basically the you could say the journals are ramping up their efforts in getting into computational papers, right? We were just overwhelmed by sort of this thing on the right where by far the majority really had a great positive impact.
Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, the where it has the positive impact, it's just so overwhelming. But right. It makes you scratch your head a little bit and think, well, what would?
Yeah. And it's even so that if you give me a minute to explain a bit more, that computational was defined as referring to XSEED resources, which is by far not the majority, by far not all computational papers. So, for example, the Blue Waters papers, the DOE machine papers that refer to these resources would count just as an average paper. So in reality, the impact would be even higher than this.
Great, thank you. Good, I'm looking in the chat and I see that links were already added to the to the preprint and to the Xpert Network website. Perfect.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Paranos, for doing that.
I just had a quick comment. I may be stating the real obvious, but I think with the changes in the ECSS funding, that there's opportunities for sort of collaboration, since Rudi was talking about perhaps getting a center of excellence or something. So, yeah.
Right. And I'd love to talk to you. You recently mentioned, Bob, that you are actually thinking of such a center as well.
Yes.
We want to make sure that we're not taking away from your effort, but it could be synergized in some way. That would be a very interesting discussion.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, coming, briefly back to this question, I don't understand actually the reasoning of NSF behind not fully supporting ECSS, at least not in the traditional sense anymore. So we'll need to explore that. I need to understand it better because there's no question, that ECSS is unbelievably important.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rudi. Of course, I'm a little biased, but I agree completely.
Don't blame me for being biased.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are at 10:59. We are done just a little bit early. Unless there are any more questions, we will wrap things up. Again, let's thank our two speakers, Rudi Eigenmann, Max Collins, for excellent presentations. This recording will be put up on the ECSS Symposium website, and Rudi and Max will collect your slides later. All right. Well, with that, thank you so much and hope to see you again in May.
Thanks.
Thank
for
you,
having me.
everybody.